Welcome to Crossroads, a show by the Epoch Times that brings you insights beyond the headlines. Now, make sure to hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to the show. You get updates, you know when the next show is. Now, on to our first story for the day. Look, the investigations into the whole Trump-Russia probe was all the way back in 2016, leading up to and then after the elections, and then for a few years. Well, they're all back in the headlines. Only now the tables are turned. And a recent trove of documents has now allegedly been discovered in several burn bags. What was the evidence doing in burn bags? Well, Fox News said this. FBI Director Kash Patel found a trove of sensitive documents related to the origins of the Trump-Russia probe buried in multiple burn bags in a secret room inside the Bureau. Sources told Fox News Digital. Again, anonymous sources, take it as you will. But they say sources told Fox News Digital that the burn bag system is used to destroy documents designated as classified or higher. So they were set to be destroyed, allegedly. Now, they note that sources also told them that these bags were found filled with thousands of documents, and that one of the documents FBI officials found in a burn bag was the classified annex to former special counsel John Durham's final report, which includes the underlying intelligence that he reviewed. You might remember John Durham was the special counsel who was put in place to investigate the Trump-Russia probe and the way it was handled. You had two different special counsels. One was Robert Mueller. Robert Mueller was specifically looking into the allegations against Trump. John Durham was the one looking into the way that the actual case was formed and whether wrongdoings were committed in the putting together of the entire Trump-Russia, fake story, which he determined it was fake. His final determination was that it was an issue of confirmation bias. Yes, it was fake, but people so badly wanted it to be true that they, in their own bias, confirmed it. That was his allegation, his conclusion. Now, it notes here that there's new stuff found as part of that we were never shown. And it says this. The declassification of the classified annex is being done in close coordination between CIA Director John Ratcliffe, Kash Patel, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, Attorney General Pam Bondi, and Acting National Security Agency Director William Hartman, meaning a lot of the top people in the intelligence community are now looking at all that hidden information and they're going to declassify it, allegedly, right? We'll see what happens. And again, on that point, we might actually soon see that. Epoch Times said this. It said a classified portion of Special Counsel John Durham's report will be made public soon, CIA Director John Ratcliffe said on July 27th. And he said, quote, what's going to come out is the underlying intelligence in the John Durham report classified annex. He said during an appearance on Fox News, that Ratcliffe said he has gone over the document and offered recommendations to other officials regarding its declassification. He described the classified portion of the report as showing that the intelligence underlying the assessment in 2017 that Russia tried to prevent then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton from getting elected as president in 2016 and boost then presidential candidate Donald Trump's chances came partly from a Clinton campaign-funded effort that resulted in a dossier compiled by ex-UK spy Christopher Steele. In other words, what we've been saying literally since 2016 is what they're confirming. So if you've been watching this show or others on Epoch Times, you've basically known this the entire time. But hey, better late than never. The evidence is finally coming out. They say this further in that the Clinton office did not respond to a request from comment. Now, on that point, again, this was already known. What's different in this case is they're finally in hard evidence confirming it. Because it's one thing to have journalists putting together research and piecing the whole picture together. It's another thing when the intelligence community finally affirms, okay, you had it right, basically. Also, a lot of other stuff happening in other news. The midterm elections, well, they're coming up faster than ever. And Texas is interestingly preparing a redistricting move that could help maintain a Republican majority in Congress, kind of no matter how it all turns out. I'll be talking more about this after we come back from a quick break.
All right, just a pause here for a super quick moment. You are, of course, watching Crossroads with Joshua Philipp. I'm just here to share a message about American Hartford Gold, my own personal gold and silver bullion dealer. Now, obviously, the recent tariffs have made the markets super turbulent and volatile. With every new piece of tariff news, the markets seem to either crash up or crash down. And of course, it's worth mentioning that these conditions don't only affect Wall Street. They affect all of us through our investments and our retirement accounts. That's why I'd like to introduce you to a company that I trust and I myself use to secure my own savings, American Hartford Gold. They specialize in helping Americans move our assets into something tangible, into something you can actually hold, which is physical gold and physical silver, two precious metals that act as a hedge against all those decisions being made in Washington, D.C. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. They have thousands of 5-star reviews, and they make the whole buying process super simple. Your metals can be shipped directly to your door, or you can transfer your current retirement account to a tax-advantaged gold IRA. And the best part is that right now, American Hartford Gold is offering an exclusive offer. When you call them today and you mention the name Joshua, you could receive up to $15,000 in free silver with your initial investment. Take advantage of their special offer. You can either just call them at 877-260-2764 or text Joshua to 65532. All their information will also be down in the description box below. And now, back to Crossroads.
Welcome back. If you're enjoying the show, be sure to support us by hitting the like button. Let me know what you think of the show in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. You'll get updates on when the next show is. And it also helps us get the show out to more people. So be sure to subscribe, hit the like button. Now, folks, the midterm elections coming up faster than ever. They're going to start preparing for it soon. I know you might say, hey, it's a year out. Why are we talking about this? The reason is because they're all preparing for it right now. All the pieces are getting put in place, and you're going to start hearing a lot more about it. And Texas, well, they're preparing a move that could actually help Republicans maintain their majority in Congress. Texas Tribune says this: Texas GOP lawmakers released their first draft of the state's new congressional map Wednesday, proposing revamped district lines that attempt to flip 5 Democratic seats in next year's midterm elections. And as the new map targets Democratic members of Congress in the Austin, Dallas, and Houston metro areas and in South Texas. It says the draft unveiled by Corpus Christi Republican Representative Todd Hunter will likely change before the final map is approved by both chambers and signed by Governor Greg Abbott. And notice that Democrats have said they might try to thwart the process by fleeing the state. That's an interesting way to do it. You kind of did in California. But they say this unusual mid-decade redistricting comes after a pressure campaign waged by President Donald Trump's political team in the hopes of padding Republicans' narrow majority in the U.S. House. Because as you know, Republicans not only have the guy in the White House, Trump, they also hold both chambers, both branches of Congress, right? They hold both the House of Representatives and the Senate. They have a supermajority, and even in the Supreme Court, hypothetically speaking, you have more conservative justices having the majority. Now that said, Democrats, when it comes to Texas trying to redistrict, they're very much trying to stop that from happening. Epoch Times said this: the Democratic National Committee is deploying tens of thousands of volunteers and ramping up direct voter outreach in Texas as part of a new national organizing program aimed at countering Republicans' mid-decade redistricting push in the state. Because every so often, states are allowed to redistrict. The issue is, of course, if you shift around how you define a district, you can capture voters or override voters. It's kind of the chess game of the elections, right? And so, if you can split a state up into certain chunks, you can make sure that those red areas vote Republican and the blue areas vote Democrat, or you can spill over into some areas while making sure that the red area is larger or the blue area is larger, depending on whether you have a Republican or Democrat state. This is done all across the country. But it says this: announced on July 28th, ahead of a final redistricting field hearing in Texas, the effort includes sending more than 250,000 texts to voters and preparing 30,000 grassroots organizers to reach persuadable Republican and independent Texans in key districts. It says further in the announcement follows a meeting on July 25th between California Governor Gavin Newsom and Texas Democratic state lawmakers Why is Newsom in California trying to change the voting maps in Texas? That's a good question. But I note this came amid growing calls for Democrats to consider redrawing maps in states they control. Newsom has not ruled out pursuing legislative or legal actions if Texas proceeds. So Governor Gavin Newsom in California is talking about potential legal actions against Texas or related to this if Texas does move forward with redistricting. Although I think the technicality here is that Newsom is talking about doing things in his state. It's very hard for states to sue each other or go after each other, but Newsom does seem to be interested in running for president on the Democrat ticket. We'll see if he actually does it. He might be on the ticket for at least the primaries, but we will see, right? But they say here, this is from Newsom, he said, "This move requires us to be prepared to fight fire with fire." And he said whether that's a special election, a ballot initiative, a bill, a fight in court, if they proceed in Texas, we will be ready. Now, Trump actually came back criticizing Newsom for that, and he raised an interesting point. He noted that in California, about 40% of voters vote Republican. So how is it that 40% of voters vote Republican when a very small majority of representatives from California are Republican? Trump is suggesting, in other words, that California has arranged its districts in such a way that it undermines the actual opinion of the voters in the state, meaning a republic is a representative democracy, meaning that we elect representatives to represent us in the democratic process. And if you redistrict in such a way to ensure that certain people's views are not represented, to make sure there's a dictatorship of one party over another that is not reflective of the actual way the state would normally swing, then is that right to do? Now, on the same point, you could argue that Republicans have done the same thing in some places, although when it comes to redistricting, Democrats tend to do much better at it. They tend to be able to do a lot more with it than Republicans can. The reason Democrats are able to redistrict in ways that benefit them much, much more than Republicans is because they argue that Republican redistricting represents racial discrimination. The narrative being that oftentimes, minority voters tend to vote more Democrat, and so when Republicans redistrict, you're capturing oftentimes more white votes, as they would say. And because of that, they say that it is racist or discriminatory when Republicans redistrict, but representative when Democrats redistrict. And so they use racial narratives to make legal challenges when Republicans try to do it. And they often win. Very often they win. And so because of that, you can have a state that is more Republican by actual percentage, but in terms of representation in Congress, they're going to be more Democrat. Again, because of the way they fold the districts. Now, speaking of holds on power, though, the Trump administration is allegedly putting plans in place to appoint yet another Supreme Court justice. Although it should be clarified, this will probably not give Trump like an additional justice who may be more in support of him, because even some of his appointees are not necessarily backing him on everything. To the dismay of some Republicans. But Trump may actually get to appoint another. Time magazine said this. It says, White House officials and a close circle of conservative lawmakers are preparing for President Donald Trump to be able to hit the ground running if a Supreme Court vacancy opens up during the remaining 3.5 years of his second term, right now. It's according to sources, they say, inside and outside the White House. Now, they note that the discussions are in early stages, and it says they focus on finding a nominee in the mold of Samuel Alito, 75, and Clarence Thomas, 77, the two oldest justices, both of whom are considered stalwart conservative jurists who have taken narrow interpretations of the constitutional text while backing an expansive view of presidential power. It notes that short lists of judges are circulating among Trump allies as they debate who can be best trusted to stick with the court's conservative wing during an appointment that could last decades. Because, of course, in the United States, there ain't no term limits for Supreme Court justices. They will get wheeled in there in a wheelchair, they'll fall asleep, and they'll still be voting because we've seen it happen before. because that's just the way it is, right? So when a president can appoint a justice, that's viewed as kind of a long-term hold on power. Of course, in the United States, we have 3 branches of government. The executive branch is the president. Congress represents almost an equal balance of power, depending on what the majority is. And of course, the justice system, the Supreme Court, represents really the third kind of pillar of power. Whatever party holds a majority, even though, again, technically the justices are not supposed to lean in one party or the other, but in terms of interpretation, of course, they do. That's also viewed as a long-term hold on power. It's viewed as like a 20-year, you could have like a 20-year president, effectively, through the control of the justice system. Now, notes here as well, though. Republicans currently control the Senate, which must confirm any nominee to the court, and the party also controlled the Senate throughout Trump's first term, allowing Trump to appoint 3 justices, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, who were all well regarded in conservative legal circles. I'd say on that point, of course, we've seen that with Trump's appointees, in particular Kavanaugh and Barrett, they have not been like 100% just behind everything Trump does. They do have independence. And so, again, that kind of goes against some of what the criticisms were. A lot of people believed they were going to come in and just basically be Trump's talking heads. They were not. They often challenge him. And so even if Trump does appoint somebody, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be like Trump puppeteering the justice system. It does not work that way, and we have not seen that. But the biggest issue when it comes to the Supreme Court is more in terms of how they interpret the Constitution. More left-leaning justices believe the Constitution is a living document, and they will interpret it through modern language, modern interpretations, and oftentimes they believe that the culture and country have changed and the world has changed, and you can't necessarily go by the original interpretation of the Constitution. The more conservative justices, they'll go by what was closer to the original intent of the Founding Fathers, which is very broad. If you go by the original intent of the Founding Fathers, basically there should be almost no controls on any kind of self-defense tool, from an assault rifle to a tank, basically. According to their interpretation, you should be able to own artillery, which, again, they did, right, during the American Revolutionary War. That would be like original intent. We have not seen it go that far, although you can own a tank. You just can't have the cannons active. And when it comes to free speech, effectively, the original interpretation would be say whatever you want, no restrictions, and anybody who tries to restrict it, well, that's the violation of the law. More modern interpretations say the world has changed enough where no, you should not be able to own any kind of firearm you want, and no, you should not be able to say just anything you want because some words are just plain old dangerous. So again, the justice who is nominated will, again, if that even happens under Trump, will have a big effect on the future of the United States. But also, look, speaking of shifting around things and justices and districts, there's also talk about the figure of the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. Democrats have been pushing for statehood. They want Washington, D.C. to become a state, and that means that because it's mostly Democrat, they would get more seats in Congress. Republicans have other plans for Washington, D.C., though, and with Trump at the helm currently, they might go with that view. Donald Trump has been discussing breaking up the federal focus in Washington. He wants to move agencies to various states across the country. He's even talking about making Washington like a federal district, so it doesn't even really impact so much like the elections. We'll see where he goes with this. He does seem, at the very least, to be moving forward to the plan to move Washington out of Washington, taking various government agencies and placing them in different parts of the country. But in the meantime, while that is happening, there's also a brand new plan going into place to make Washington, D.C., quote-unquote, safe and beautiful. U.S. District Attorney for District of Columbia, this is Jeanine Pirro, formerly with Fox News, she said, in line with President Trump's directive to make D.C. safe and beautiful, my office will determine every defendant's legal status as soon as a matter is brought here. Meaning, of course, if a defendant comes in who's committed a crime, because remember, she's the attorney there. If somebody commits a crime, or at least is accused of crime, they will immediately determine, is this person legal? Are they an American, or are they an illegal immigrant? And if they're an illegal immigrant, well, things are going to turn out a bit differently for them. She said this: "I'm cutting the red tape and pushing back against the sanctuary city status of D.C. so that we can protect the hardworking citizens of our nation's capital. No longer will illegals be found burrowing into our cases in the criminal justice system." And here's a bit more on what she had to say on this. Watch.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jeanine Pirro, the U.S. Attorney in D.C., and we are prioritizing the President's executive order to make D.C. safe and beautiful. And as part of that initiative, what my office has done in recent weeks is we are now trying to identify those illegals who are currently burrowed in our criminal justice system, who've identified themselves either as citizens or individuals with actual legal status who do not have status or are illegal. Previously, there was no questioning them, and there was certainly no verification of that. Now I've got my chief criminal investigator, Matt Fox Moles, who has an enforcement removal officer embedded with his investigators, working with ICE to identify those individuals already in the system that we can then find out from ICE what their status is. Previously, no one even asked. They would just literally go through the system and either be convicted and possibly go to jail, or be found not guilty and be released. But the D.C. City Council has worked very hard to make sure that these individuals avoid any contact with ICE, almost to the point where the law requires, upon a request by a defense attorney, that an illegal be removed to the Department of Corrections when there may be no actual case, to kind of throw the feds off, as opposed to simply releasing them from the courthouse right then and there. We're on top of this. We're making sure now that not just in the misdemeanor cases, but in the federal docket, the Superior Court docket, we are identifying the illegals that are in the system to make sure that D.C. is safe, that we know who is here and who is entitled to be here. So as we cut through the red tape, and as we break down some of those federal bureaucratic walls and fight the sanctuary city status, we are making D.C. safe again.
Now, that's a big deal, of course, because Washington, D.C. is a sanctuary city. And Trump, of course, his administration, they're currently filing lawsuits against basically all of the sanctuary cities, including New York, including even entire states like California, trying to overturn the sanctuary city laws. The argument they're using is it represents the obstruction of justice, meaning officials, if again they win the cases and it's determined officials try to block them, by doing so they could be committing a crime. Trump is even making very direct threats now against individual states and cities, even saying that he may override them, maybe deploy federal forces to these cities to enforce the law, and he's even threatening to arrest government officials if they continue to support or enforce sanctuary city laws. In terms of practice, what the sanctuary city laws do is they make it so that if an illegal immigrant commits a crime, right, they are brought before the justice system, the legal system, the judges, the attorneys, the police, they are not allowed to cooperate with Customs, Border Protection, or ICE. Meaning, of course, normally the way the law in the United States has always been, until the sanctuary city laws began, if an illegal immigrant commits a crime, they're handed over to, again, border agents who then deport them. And they're still charged with a crime, still convicted, but they're also forced out of the United States. What the sanctuary city laws do specifically is they protect criminals from being deported. This would not have anything to do with just, your normal illegal immigrant so much, unless it's like a traffic stop or something. This very specifically protects criminals. And so what Judge Jeanine Pirro is doing here, who's again now the attorney for Washington, D.C., is she's, through her role, overriding Washington, D.C.'s sanctuary city policies, ensuring that basically the illegal immigrants are deported when and if they commit crimes. we will probably see some we will probably see some legal challenges with that, because she's effectively going against the will of the mayor, and we'll see how that goes. But it does seem the Trump administration is backing this entire idea. So with the backing of the federal government, things could turn out very differently. Now, like, also, when it comes to the legal battles being brought all over the place, there's also a legal battle over food stamps and the investigations into them. Now, food stamps, of course, are what you use to go to the store and get free food if, again, you're on welfare or something else, or if you just plain old don't feel like working. Now, Republicans argue they want to find whether illegal immigrants are getting food stamp benefits through fraud. And it's known that this happens. I know people who are illegal immigrants who get SNAP benefits. And Democrats are saying that this is more than just that. They're saying that, hey, this is not just about you trying to find out whether there's fraud in the food stamp system. They're raising concerns over the privacy of Americans. They're saying that this would expose the sensitive data of Americans to authorities. Possible violation of the Constitution of, searches and seizures, right? Daily Caller said this: a coalition of Democratic attorneys general is waging a court battle to prevent the Trump administration from obtaining food stamp data on millions of recipients, arguing the move is an attack on migrants. Now, they say that New York Attorney General Letitia James, joined by California Attorney General Rob Bonta and 19 other prosecutors, filed a lawsuit in U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California on Monday to block the Department of Agriculture, the USDA, from obtaining personal information on Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP recipients, meaning food stamps, according to court documents. And notes the filing marks the latest litigation by Democrats opposed to the Trump administration's agenda. And they say this, quote, Attorney General James and the coalition argue this highly sensitive data, which includes home addresses, social security numbers, recent locations, immigration statuses, and more, will likely be shared across federal agencies and used for immigration enforcement in violation of the law. Good question. If they're, again, illegal immigrants, then how does it work that they have social security numbers and other things? Why would that then be a violation of the law if they're violating the law by having that in the first place? But again, Letitia James is saying this, raising concerns in particular over the sharing of information between different agencies. And that is a kind of shaky legal ground in the United States. Agencies taking personal identifiable information, what they call PPI, right? Personal identifiable information, and sharing it between different agencies. If they do that, there are laws in place to prevent that from happening. Because even when it comes to like intelligence analysis, even if they're investigating people, there are laws in place to prevent the identities of Americans from being revealed unless you've committed a crime. And if they're investigating you when you have not committed a crime and revealing information when you've not committed a crime, especially communicating it, transferring it when your name is unsealed, that's actually against the law. Now, are illegal immigrants also protected from that? Well, that's yet to be determined. I think conservatives would say absolutely not. How could they possibly be protected from it? Others are saying yes, they are. And they're filing lawsuits to prevent it from happening. Now look, also speaking of free handouts, it's been a while since regular Americans got a rebate check. We all got a small one during COVID, you might remember that, where they're saying the American people are suffering. Americans can't afford groceries, we're out of work, we were locked in our homes, as many of you recall, during the initial lockdowns of the COVID-19 pandemic preparations. And of course they said, well, we need to pass a massive spending bill to give Americans money. They passed a massive one. They gave us all $600 checks, and then they sent money to like every corner of the world for things like gender studies and fish experiments and statues of camels, literally. And now there's a new push to take the money coming in through tariffs and to actually share the wealth with Americans. Just the News said this: Missouri Republican Senator Josh Hawley on Monday introduced legislation that would send at least $600 to every American adult and child in the form of a tariff rebate check that is similar to pandemic-era stimulus checks. So at least $600, maybe more, depending on how much we make through the good old tariffs, right? Now, notice that Hawley co-authored the legislation creating COVID-19 pandemic stimulus checks in 2020 alongside independent Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, which provided Americans with up to $1,200 to help with financial hardships created by the pandemic. I did not get $1,200. Maybe some people did. But they say the new bill echoes the stimulus legislation. And the move comes after President Donald Trump told reporters last week he will be interested in sending Americans tariff-related rebate checks, though he did not indicate how much those would be. Now, there's been a lot of discussion on how that could possibly work. On Trump's side, he has been talking about replacing income tax for most Americans by using money from the tariffs. And personally, I would prefer not paying taxes over getting like a $600 check. The issue, of course, is that you have a lot of unemployed Americans. Unemployment is still relatively high. And of course, this would also give money to kids. Would you prefer a $600 check over not paying taxes? The issue with, again, just a tax system change would be that people who don't pay taxes would not benefit from it. It would only benefit Americans who pay taxes. And so there's different takes on how they should handle it. There's also a big old other issue, which is, well, the national debt and the fact that we're paying more in interest rates for national debt than we are basically our entire military budget. And look, as nice as money sounds to give us a bit of rebates from those tariffs, well, the national debt is becoming a looming crisis for us. But they have a new solution for that. As one solution, the Treasury Department is now accepting donations. Fox News said this. Americans, if they are so inclined, can now donate to pay down the national debt via Venmo and PayPal. The U.S. Treasury Department's little-known program has been around for decades. I didn't know this. And Americans have actually donated $67.3 million in the last 29 years, which has done little to bring down the current $36.7 trillion in debt. They say on Wednesday, an X post from NPR's Jack Corbett showing the screenshot of the 21st century payment option went viral. They said, quote, "You can Venmo the United States to help pay off the national debt," Corbett wrote. And again, that's a big deal, right? Now, they note that donors can go under pay.gov and under the, quote, gifts to reduce the public debt part, choose between the more traditional bank account or credit card, debit card options, and the newer options to make a gift. So if you want to make a donation to the Treasury Department, maybe if you get that $600 or maybe a little bit more, well, you can help pay down the national debt. Sure, they're going to spend it right away anyways and put us more in debt, but you can rest assured that you made an effort. You did your job as an American to try to pay off that debt. Look, in other news, though, the Department of Justice is also now requesting an investigation into the recent mob beating of a man and a woman in Cincinnati that's gone viral. You might have seen this. It's pretty brutal. Gateway Pundit said this. Attorney General Pam Bondi confirmed reports Monday night that she has in fact ordered the FBI to investigate the vicious beating in downtown Cincinnati late Friday or night, early Saturday morning of a white man and a white woman by a mostly black mob that received national attention after the video of the attack went viral. A lot of this is racially charged. If you were to read the comments on Twitter, it was kind of racist, right? But of course, this has become a big issue because it is a fact the justice system, because of the way that a lot of, attorneys general and so on were elected, and this was public, they believed in race-based judgment. So they had lighter laws for black Americans, harsher laws for white Americans. Many attorneys general would deny that was taking place. George Soros, billionaire, Open Societies Foundation, he publicly wrote about this. He even wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal where he said that he was, in fact, funding the campaigns of attorneys general for exactly that reason. His reasoning in his own public writing, again in an op-ed in Wall Street Journal, stated that he believed there was a discrepancy between the number of black Americans who were in prison versus the number of white Americans who were in prison. And so he was he was paying into the campaigns and pushing the campaigns of attorneys general and prosecutors and others who would be more likely to take race into account when meting out justice. Now, that has led to a lot of problems in the United States. In particular, I would say it made racism probably worse, because a lot of people now believe that race will be considered on whether or not you're charged with a crime. Race will be considered on how harsh of a punishment you get for a crime. And race now is becoming an issue in viral videos like this. Now, they say here, the viral video was originally posted on Saturday by Corey Bowman, half-brother of Vice President J.D. Vance and Republican candidate for Cincinnati mayor. It notes further in that viral screen images show a man on the ground being attacked by a mob, an unconscious woman with blood streaming from her mouth. And it's pretty vicious. I know that I won't show you because it's just vicious, right? Basically, you have a large group of people beating a man and a woman. They fall to the ground. They're beating them while they're on the ground. The woman looks unconscious or dead. You don't really know if you're in a situation like that. She was not dead. She was unconscious. But the crowd continued to beat them when they're on the ground, which in normal cases would be attempted murder. Now, under normal systems of justice, if a mob of people beat somebody, you could say that that would also represent a much harsher crime. And if somebody's on the ground and you continue to beat them, that is attempted murder. It goes far beyond self-defense, in other words. Now, on the other side of the argument, one of the heads of the police department in Cincinnati came out and criticized Americans for posting videos like this, saying the video only shows part of the story. That is true. The video only shows the part where people begin attacking these two individuals. We don't know what provoked it. We don't know if there's any justifiable reason for it. And again, we know that I would say again, if someone's on the ground and you're still beating them, no matter who it is, that would be a violation of the law, a very serious one. The question is, will anybody be charged? Because until now, it did not look like they were moving forward with charges. Now, on the other point with this, I would also say that race does seem to be an issue, and I will say it just like this. If you flip the races, what would the national reaction be? You tell me. Flip the races, because this is often what I do when I try to analyze whether bias is taking part in a debate. I flip the roles. So, for example, if Republicans are doing something and Democrats are mad about it, I imagine if Democrats were doing it, would Republicans be mad about it? Flip the roles and you can see if you're biased or not. So in this case, if you had a black man and a black woman who were attacked by a mob of 5, 6 or more white people, and they beat them, and then the black man and black woman fell to the ground, and they continued to beat them until both, or at least one of them, was unconscious, the woman blood streaming from her mouth. What do you believe the public reaction would be? Do you believe the police in Cincinnati would be angry about this, or would they tell you that, hey, you're wrong for posting the video? Do you believe that the local officials would move to prosecute this, or do you believe they'd say, you know what, the whole context isn't there and just ignore it? Do you believe the media would ignore it, which almost all of them did? How do you believe the reaction would be? Again, when you flip the roles, that's when you can see whether there is in fact bias in play. Now, on that point, the Trump administration, they seem to be moving on their own to investigate this. Again, Attorney General Pam Bondi has directed the FBI to, at the very least, investigate what happened. So we will probably be hearing more about it. Now, that said, questions, comments, anything you want to talk about, leave it in the chat. Let's jump into a discussion. First off, from Web Coder, you're saying, the blame game is not simple. If you set a low standard for prosecution, your opponent will have that standard to use against you when he is next in power. Yeah, and you know, let's put it this way, okay? The fact that Donald Trump was investigated for just about everything when he was not president during the last 4 years has set the precedent where Trump can go after his political opponents for just about everything. In some cases, for example, in the New York case where it was not rape, he was investigated for defamation, and that was the real nature of the case. They even briefly overturned the statute of limitations, allowing a 1-year gap for that whole case to be brought forward because it was past the statute of limitations. So if you can change the statute of limitations to go after somebody, if you can assess the value of a person's home, Mar-a-Lago, they said that Trump was overvaluing it and was using this for tax issues, and then you take a single misdemeanor, elevated single misdemeanor into a felony, and then turn that one felony that was a misdemeanor into like dozens of felonies. That's unprecedented. We never saw laws being used that way before. And now that Trump is in power, Democrats are saying that he is weaponizing the system of justice against them. They're saying that he's vindictive, he's out for vengeance, and he's coming after all of them. Now look, they're kind of right. Right? Let's be honest with ourselves. Trump is literally posting memes of himself chasing them in a police car, right? Like photoshopped memes of himself driving a police car, chasing them down, and literally posting just memes and images saying he's going to arrest all of them. I would say that, yeah, he probably intends to go after them using the legal system. Now, normally the president can't do that. That's why we have separation of powers within the 3 branches of government. The justice system has to go after it, not the president. And remember also, part of Trump's investigations, even into like the raid on Mar-a-Lago, for conservatives, they were saying, well, did the Biden White House have a role in directing that? Because that would be a big scandal. If the president directed the Justice Department to carry out an investigation, that'd be a big deal. Trump is kind of openly doing that, right? He's kind of openly doing that. Now, on the other point with this, there is a nuance here. Because you might remember Joe Biden, when he was president, he was giving his speeches talking about the threat of the MAGA Republicans and MAGA extremists and the great MAGA king, and how these were a threat to democracy and a threat to the American system. And the Justice Department seemed to be acting on that. They were going after the Jan 6ers, they were going after conservatives and Christians and Catholics and everything else. They really were. And they were going after conservative media. How many conservative news outlets or journalists faced, again, criminal investigations, lawsuits, and other things like that, prosecutions? Even Epic Times, of course, we were attacked like that. Still are, in fact. And so, that did happen. You didn't really see it on the other side of the aisle. Now that Trump's in, he's kind of doing the same thing. He's stating his personal opinion from the office of the White House, and the Justice Department is not necessarily acting at the directives of Trump, but is working, it seems, in conjunction with the same interpretations. Now, can Democrats make a big deal about that? Yeah, they can, and they are. They're saying that Trump is weaponizing the systems of justice against him. The problem they have, just as Webcoder noted, they established the precedent for it. They did it, and they created a system whereby Trump can use the same things they did against them. It's the age-old problem. There's an interesting trend in history that people who invent torture devices tend to be killed eventually by the same device they invented. Almost across the board. Anytime somebody invents a new device for executions or anything like that, very often they themselves are executed using the same tools they invented. It is the case that the tables turn, and oftentimes the thing you created can in fact be used against you, and that very often happens, right? And so it does seem that Trump is very openly out for revenge. He said it. He says he's the retribution president, and that seems to be the case. So we'll see what happens. Now, you could argue this in a few different ways, though, because you could also argue this is the return of justice, that these systems of justice had in fact been weaponized against him. Not even just over the past 4 years, when even a lot of people who are just his voters were also targeted, But going back even further to his first term in office, the whole Trump-Russia scandal and so on. If somebody creates a conspiracy or acts in such a way where you have a coup d'etat or treason, as Trump is calling it, and they got away with it, is it vengeance if you put them in prison? I don't know. Or is that justice, right? And I think that's on Trump's side, the argument they're using. This is not retribution. This is just justice against what were, in fact, unjust actions. Believe which side you want, because that's where it's at right now. California gal, you're saying, and with the redistricting in Texas, Newsom, Governor Gavin Newsom in California, is wanting to redistrict so Republicans lose 8 House seats from California. Yeah, and again, the problem you have with redistricting, so Republicans, if you go by, let's put it this way, okay? If you go by state legislature, the state legislatures, Republicans tend to have a majority. What does that tell you? It means within the states, at the state level, oftentimes Republicans win, right? The issue you have is the way the districts are divided often swing votes in such a way where Democrats are able to win when normally they wouldn't. And even though Republicans, because of their hold in the state legislatures, would be able to control the process of redistricting, they would be able to do it, Democrats often file lawsuits against them, arguing that redistricting is racial infused, that you're taking away the voices of Black Americans, or they just say minorities, right? You might have a blue area that's predominantly Hispanic, or a blue area that's predominantly Black, or a blue area that's predominantly, any other racial group other than white. And if they redistrict in a way where one group of people loses their voice, they say that's a violation of the civil rights laws and they overturn it. And so oftentimes Republicans are not able to redistrict. Democrats, because, it's a weird argument in my opinion, because I'd say white people are a race too. I know that might come as a shock. Yes, white people are a race. I'd actually say the race goes even further than that. I'd even say that individual countries, individual tribes represent individual races as well. I would not even define race by currently drawn maps or currently, conceived of white, black, brown categories that a lot of people throw people into. I'd even say that, Celts are different from the British, right? I would say that even among the former Germanic tribes, you had massive cultural differences, and you can't define them as all just being German. I would say that race is not as simple as people have boiled it down to be. And we recognize this with some countries, but we don't recognize it with others. Remember that our interpretation of maps, the difference between, for example, France and Spain, for example, these are, of course, grouped together as being part of Europe, but in reality, the borders of France have changed many times throughout history, and the French cannot even be understood simply just through the borders that are drawn. Luxembourg, again, very different culture. The Basque people, very different culture. Very different cultures. Funny note, by the way, a tragic love tale of my own family. One of my great-grandfathers was from Luxembourg, and one of my great-grandmothers was from Basque country, and they got disowned because they fell in love. It was why they actually moved to the United States. Forbidden love. How dare he fall in love with a woman from Basque country? But anyways, my point in saying this is that these narratives only hold up when it comes to redistricting because they don't regard white people as a race, at least in my opinion. And so I would say on the other side, if California draws up voting maps where 40% of the state is voting Republican, but Republicans have only, like a 10, 20% representation in Congress, does that actually undermine the voice of the voters? I would say it does. And if you draw it in such a way where white voters, if you want to play the race game, are losing the representation, does that represent any kind of racial divide? I think the whole racial argument is stupid. I don't agree with it one bit. But if you want to fight fire with fire, I'd say yes, right? I'd say yes. And so, I don't think it's a good way to judge things. And I think it's used more, I think race is used more as a political tool, to be honest. Flying Squirrel, you're saying communists are for illegal immigration, yet say we live on stolen land. Yeah, they don't really care about that. And this has been an argument drawn up for a long time. Look, you could say that Canada lives on stolen land. The Canadians, of course, they were, okay, let's go through their history, right? First you had the natives, and the French went into Canada, and they actually worked with the natives quite a bit. The French, probably more so than other settlers, worked with the native tribes. Yes, they still went to war with them, but they worked with them quite a bit. The native tribes actually learned scalping from the French, by the way. The Indian Wars in the United States, one of the many forgotten wars, were mainly between the British Empire and the French Empire. We call them the Indian Wars because the French were so closely aligned with the Indian tribes that it was more, the Americans were fighting a lot of the Indians. The divide between the United States and Canada was more between the British Empire and France. And the divides you had, right, most of Latin America was under Spain and Portugal and other countries. A lot of these countries worked with the native tribes. Yes, they had wars, but they also had a lot of allies within the native tribes. And so you had a mixture of European native alliances fighting what were like continental world wars. When the Founding Fathers wrote the Declaration of Independence, they actually noted this, that we were tired of fighting the bloody wars of Europe. When they talked about that, they were referring specifically to whenever Britain went to war with France, America had to go to war with Canada, right? Or go to war with Spain if they had a war. And so we kept getting pulled into their conflicts. Go through history, though. You could argue that the French stole the land from the natives, and the natives also stole land from each other. And then, of course, the United States invaded France, or the British Empire at the time invaded France, won the war, and Canada, not France. And Canada went from being under French rule to British rule. And then the American Civil War broke out when technically Canada and the United States were part of the same country. Canada was part of the United States during that time, although we were not called the United States because it was pre-founding of America. But it was all under British rule. That was the British Empire, right? Now, you could say the British stole that from the French. And then what happens? The Civil War breaks, or the American Revolutionary War breaks out. Americans fight against the British. What is now Canada became the British Loyalists. And, we fought for everything. The claim that Canada is, you could say that Canada stole the land from the Americans in the same way that you could argue that America stole Texas from the Spaniards, or they say now the Mexicans, right? Because you had the creation of a new country. I mean, how do you define who steals from who at that point? It's very ridiculous arguments. If you go to pre-colonial Mexico, you had the Aztecs, and the way the Aztec kingdom worked, they were actually kind of an advanced civilization. They were on par with, in terms of civilization advancement, on par with kind of where the Germanic tribes would have been during the Roman Empire. Maybe a little further along than that. They had a pretty well-established civilization. They were the biggest city in most of the New World, the most well-established, right? But they were very bloody. The way that they would coronate new leaders, if they had a new leader come in, a new king or a new official, they believed that the number of people they murdered as sacrifice would represent the power and strength of that individual. And so they would just terrorize the other tribes in Mexico. And I mean brutalize them. They used them as human farms for human sacrifice to coronate their leaders, right? In addition to other just horrible atrocities. Which is why, of course, when the Spanish conquistadors went there, the tribes worked with them to fight against the Aztecs, which is why you had a very small number of conquistadors able to overthrow a very large civilization, right? How do you define who stole from whom at that point? Were the Aztecs living on stolen land because they were killing other tribes and, sacrificing them and taking over their territory? Was that stolen land? Were the conquistadors the liberators of the occupiers? Is that a fair assessment, or is that a stupid assessment? I'd say it's a stupid assessment. If you go to Texas, or even into Mexico at that time, you had, of course, the Apache and the Comanche fighting each other. Very bloody wars. The Apache-Comanche wars were no joke. I mean, the Apache were a very skilled war tribe. I mean, they were really feared. But the Comanche were brutal even by their standards. The Comanche had found they were not a very strong tribe until they learned horseback riding. They were incredible horseback riders, like beyond most civilizations. They were very good at horseback riding. And they had a way where they could sling themselves under the horse's neck and fire their bows and arrows from horseback. They would ride without saddles. I mean, had they been in like older Europe, they would have been a very formidable force because until the West developed stirrups and you had horseback archery become a thing, it really wasn't possible. The Comanche could do it. The Comanche decimated the Apache. Would you say the Comanche were living on stolen land? That's a ridiculous argument. I don't think anybody would argue that. And so how do you define stolen land? What communists try to do is they try to dig up anything that can make you hate anybody. And then they inflate it and make it the biggest thing in the world and say, how dare you persecute me? While ironically carrying out some of the worst human rights abuses the world has ever witnessed. Communism itself killed upwards of low-end estimates. If you go by the Black Book of Communism, low-end estimates, 100 million people. Current estimates, and remember the Black Book of Communism was a Harvard book. It was very well sourced. I recommend reading it if you haven't read it. Newer information suggests they killed upwards of 150 million, and that number is still counting. They're still killing people. And so if you want to talk about human rights abuses, communism is worse than any colonizer or anything like that. They've terrorized the human race worse than any other movement in history. And so how do you want to define this? All they're trying to do is drum up hatred. That's all they're trying to do. And if you want to make any group in history look bad, and you can pull back 100 years, 1,000 years, 5,000 years, and say, look at how they wronged you, you can demonize anybody. Every single person on earth, every single race on earth. If you want to only focus on the negative, you can find ways to hate anybody. Is that a good way to live, though? I would say absolutely not. Is that a smart way to live? No, it is not. Again, you know what I mean? There's been no such thing as a civilization that didn't fight somebody else. The ones who didn't probably no longer exist because they were wiped out. And so, we are the descendants of those who fought. That is true for every race on the face of the planet. And so, how do you define it, right? They're just trying to stir up hatred. And so, ignore them, right? Ashley from and don't let yourself get infected by their virus of hatred, would be my recommendation. Don't let the virus of communism infect your soul with their hatred, because that's what they want. Ashley from California, you're saying, I don't know which is more insulting, a small rebate from tariff revenue or asking for donations after washing so much of our money, after wasting so much of money. See, how much is Congress donating? Yeah, I know. I can tell you I'm not currently planning on donating to the Treasury. I do hope they find ways to pay off the debt, but I'm not planning on donating to them, right? My personal stance. I would not mind getting $600 as a rebate, but I also don't think it's responsible when you're in debt. I mean, I don't know. I can see both sides to it. You know, this is what I think is really happening. I think you have the midterms coming up, and let's be honest, you know, Republicans and Democrats, they're both trying to find ways to, you know, make people happy about what's happening. For Republican, you know, really the economy tends to be the biggest thing that impacts people's basic livelihoods. People want to see my quality of life has gotten better. What is the most base level of quality of life? Well, it's your financial stability, at least in terms of, you know, government can't control your love life, at least I hope they can't. They can't control your family relations, at least I hope they can't. But they can control the general state of the economy. So when it comes to what they can do to make your life happy or miserable, the economy and the tax rates tend to be a big part of that. So Republicans, they need to show the American people, hey, what we're doing is working. Hey, we're making life better. Hey, your financial situation is better. And I would say that giving rebates to people demonstrates that, would make a very tangible message that the tariffs are in your interest. And I think that for Trump, they probably need to demonstrate that. They need to show people who don't think on a longer spectrum of time, because the issue with tariffs is you're probably not going to see the benefits of it until they bring the factories back. The real benefits of the tariffs, it's going to be the coming back of the American industry. That will probably take at least 2 years, meaning that will be after the midterm elections. And so I think Republicans need to show progress, and they need to show that they're doing things that benefit you before that for the sake of the midterms. I don't know if that's the intent. That would be my assumption. But I also don't think it's responsible to spend money when you don't have it. One of the greatest pieces of financial advice I was ever given was from my dad, and he told me never spend money you don't have. Never go into debt. Pay off your debt as soon as you get into it, and that's how you should manage your funds. If you go a little bit into debt, pay it off as fast as you possibly can. Never let debt stay. And for that reason, I never got into debt. And I never plan to if I can help it. I know for some people it's unavoidable, but I do think the advice of being frugal until you're out of debt is good advice. And I think if Congress did that, it would be fantastic. If they would spend below our means until we pay off the debt, I think it would be good for the country, because interest rates will tear you to pieces. Interest rates will take away a good chunk of your salary every month. And if you never get yourself out of debt, you're just going to be paying the down on the interest rates. Yeah, my dad gave me a lot of financial advice, actually. When I was like a kid, he made me read the book The Richest Man in Babylon about, you know, saving money and investing and stuff like that. He really gave me a lot of good advice on that. He still gives me good advice, by the way. Right? All right, everyone, that said, it's Thursday. So again, we're not going to have a show tomorrow, but we will have prime time. So be sure to join us tomorrow night, 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern time. It's a more relaxed show. We joke around a lot more as a handful of us. It's, you know, between NTD and then Roman and I from Epic Times are with them. It's a great show. I hope you watch it. Also, let me know what you think in the chat. Do you plan on donating to the U.S. Treasury? Tell me. If you're planning to donate to them, you have a heart of gold. I admire you. Thank you. Thank you for your service. But if you don't plan on doing it, tell me why if you are. I'm curious. But if you're not, let me know also. Do you think that Congress should work on giving us a rebate check from the tariffs? Do you think this is good for us? Do you think it's good for the midterms? Do you think it's necessary for the American people? I'm curious where you all stand on this. That said, folks, again, join us tomorrow night, 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern time for prime time. And until then, I'll see you again on Monday, 10:30 a.m. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.